Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 224, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I have got Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Please clap.
Oh man, nobody claps.
Yeah.
Nobody claps.
Nobody ever claps.
That's true.
Even though I say, please clap.
Yeah, that's how Isaac starts off every one of his public speaking things.
Well, please clap isn't really going to do much for you in Starbucks, but you know.
Right.
Yeah.
When they order for Isaac Orr, please clap.
Please clap.
Oh man. Man. I'm gonna say that's my name. Then next time they're
Please
like, "Oh,
clap.
what's your name?" We're gonna put it on your cup. I'll just say, "Please clap."
Please, last name clap. Please clap. Also joining us, we have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. Jim, how are you?
I'm fine. A little chilly. It's very chilly in the studio today. So
Yeah, we should have opened the door. I'm wearing my sweatshirt here, but we're ready to go. That'll keep me on my toes. If you hear any chattering, that is my teeth. But yeah, we got a couple of interesting topics. I think it'll lead to some interesting discussions. I think on both topics we might be a little at odds with each other. So it should make for a pretty interesting episode. There is an update on our survivor pool.
That's right.
The Democratic.
Yeah, that's right, Donnie.
Yes. So
well, why don't you tell everybody what happened, Donnie? Since Donnie, your team took a hit, Donnie.
Yeah, please clap, Donald.
Yep. So those that don't pay as close attention to this, and you shouldn't be, we'll do that for you. Julian Castro has dropped out of the race officially, who was my third overall pick, I believe.
I'll look that up. I think he was your third overall pick. Yeah, that's true.
So he's out, which puts me in last place. I only have one candidate left, and that's Andrew Yang.
That's right.
So
Dude,
apparently,
#gang. I think he's gonna do okay.
yeah. He's doing fine. He made a bundle this last quarter, apparently. So he doesn't seem like he's going to be dropping out anytime soon. But I was doing some just back of the envelope math, and I'm pretty sure that I am mathematically eliminated from this contest.
You're out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if he wins, everyone drops out perfectly. I'm still nowhere close.
I'll tell you what, Donnie. Since I'm the commissioner of our little Democrat primary death pool here, if Andrew Yang is elected president, you win. All right, saying it right now. Executive decision.
What? No way.
I'll take it. Marianne Williamson apparently just cut all of her staff too. So she's just a staff of one.
Well, that's shocking news because I think the big news there is that she had staff. I had no idea she had campaign staff.
It was just her cats. She just fired her cats.
They were just paid in earth crystals.
Yeah,
Right.
and Friskies. So yeah.
So not a good sign for her campaign, but still good news for Justin because she's not out yet. That's one of his draftees there. So any memorable moments from the Julian Castro campaign that we can reminisce upon before we kind of leave him to the dustbin of the 2020 primaries here?
At the end of October, I believe, he begged everyone, says, I need to raise money. I need to get to this money amount or my campaign will be over.
Yeah.
And so he found enough suckers to go ahead and just burn money, throw it down the toilet, and give it to his campaign to keep him alive for another 2 months.
Right, to get through the holidays.
Right. And I love how and of course, like all other presidential candidates, they just suspended their campaign. They're not actually
Of course.
out because they need to keep their campaigns open so they continue to raise money to find more suckers to pay the debt off of their campaigns, and then they will finally close it off. So,
Yep, so he is out.
no, of course, no.
Michael Bennett's still in. John Delaney.
Yes.
Who are these people? Why are they still in? It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I don't even know who's on my team anymore.
You've got Buttigieg and what's his name?
Cory Booker,
Booker.
and Amy Klobuchar.
Oh, and Amy Klobuchar. Look at you.
Isaac's
Yeah.
doing well. Isaac's actually tied for first with Justin, and I'm 1 point behind in third place.
Right. So stay tuned for more information on that. I'm sure 4 more candidates will drop out within the next month or so. So especially once February comes around the corner. Obviously, that's when the start of the actual primaries are. So we'll see people start dropping like flies. But bad news for me. I lost all interest in this survivor pool. So you guys are going to have to do the Googling from now on when it comes to candidates dropping out.
Oh, Jim loves this anyway, so like this is his favorite thing. So we won't have any lack of Googled.
I was in first place for a while, and I was happy.
Well, you've lost 3 of the last 4.
Yeah, exactly. So. Right.
Yeah, that's rough, Donnie.
Kamala
Can we
Harris.
trade players in this? Like, is that allowed?
Who? Yeah, you were like, oh, can I trade for Yang? What do you want to give me? Booker? Booker for Yang?
Yeah, I would do that.
Well, I don't think that's going to be able to happen, but
I would assume some of your points that you've already taken too. Like, let's make it interesting.
Right, it's a good point. I think everyone will have to agree on it, but
I don't think so. I think just you and I have to. This isn't some lame fantasy football league where everybody needs to approve the trade.
I'll give you Yang, and I'll take Booker, but you have to give me 20% of your winnings.
No, get out of here.
Let's move on. So, gentlemen, I saw pretty interesting. Isaac, you weren't on for the last episode, but we talked about kind of 2020, looking forward. And the episode I think you were on a week prior to that was kind of looking back at the last year and decade. Well, it wasn't until after our latest episode went up that I saw an interesting post across my social media account. I forgot who shared it, but it was a graphic that was composed by the Global Warming Policy Forum.
Yep.
And it looks like 10 different items here, and it's all based around this idea, the 2010s, humanity's best decade yet. So it goes through, and there's a number of different graphics here. 28% of all the wealth ever created was apparently done in the last decade. In the last decade, extreme poverty across the world was cut in half. Child mortality rate was reduced by 1/3. Weather-related deaths decreased by 95% since 2060. I don't know why they broke away from the decade thing for that one.
1960s.
What did I say?
2060.
Yeah.
1960s, sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, that's not this decade.
Right, exactly. But whatever.
It probably went up a little bit. So.
I assume the trend continued, but whatever. Death rate from pollution down 19%. And peak stuff consumption of 66 out of 72 resources is declining. So it's this idea that this stuff isn't reported widely in the news because bad news sells and good news does not. So it continues in the article, and it's a really good article. Everything we talk about will be linked in the show notes. It kind of elaborates on some of these points. It says that extreme poverty has fallen below 10% of the world's population for the first time ever. Famine virtually went extinct. Malaria, polio, and heart disease are all in decline. Let's see. We're using less resources today. It continues on. This is kind of specific to the UK, and it talks about the amount of resources consumed per person in Britain fell by 1/3 between 2000 and 2017. So really interesting stuff here. And again, this idea that like the news won't report on this. So, organizations like us have to. But I mean, does that come as a shock to you? Some of the things that I was listing off, Isaac, will ask you first.
The peak stuff does. And when you read the article, it says certain countries are using peak stuff, not the world in general is using peak stuff. But otherwise, all of this stuff makes sense. I read Steven Pinker's book. Which one is this one? It is Enlightenment Now. So like this is all stuff that, sites like Human Progress have been talking about for a while, but it does kind of go against the overall narrative of OMG, we're all going to die.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this all the time, whether it's like the terrible predictions about the future, we're all going to run out of food, we're all going to turn into a blue mist, global cooling is going to freeze us all in our chairs. So, I mean, that's just the general narrative, Jim, and it seems like these findings over the last decade completely run against that narrative.
Reality's been running against a apocalyptic narrative for many, many decades now. In fact, that's why you should take what Greta Thunberg says with quite a few grains of salt. We're all going to die. The Earth's going to be ruined. There's going to be you're destroying the Earth. It's going to be uninhabitable. Whole cities will be underwater. I mean, all of that stuff has been predicted for decades. None of it has come true. In reality, prosperity, and I say it again, but the use of fossil fuels is what fuels prosperity. is what is lifting everybody out of the misery that has been predicted, going back to the population bomb with Paul Ehrlich up to the present. I'm not surprised by any of these statistics, because this is how life progresses. The idea that an apocalyptic nightmare is always just over the horizon because of human activity related to climate change has always been BS. The more wealth you can create around the world, you're going to have fewer diseases. You're going to have higher survival rates for children, even in very less developed countries than in the West. The idea that we are consuming less stuff as a planet. I'm not like Isaac said, that's not exactly true. Some countries are better than others on that. But what you're seeing is that you're seeing developing economies like in South America and in Asia, subcontinental Asia, that have made humongous strides in standards of living, in the health of their populations. And that is all because, the modern society is fueled and the economy is strong because of the use of fossil fuels. Cheap energy is the key to all of this progress for greater human happiness and survival.
Yeah, I mean, they go into a couple of things. There's a couple of ways I would want to respond to what you just said, but this one paragraph that I have circled here, it says, until recently, most economists assume that these improvements, this is the idea of energy efficiency, were always in vain because of the rebound effects. If you cut the costs of something, people will just want more of it. Make lights less energy hungry, and people will just leave them on for longer. This is known as the Jevons paradox. After the 19th century economist William Stanley Jevons, who first described it. But Andrew McAfee argues that the Jevons paradox doesn't hold up. Suppose you switch from incandescent to LED light bulbs in your house, and you save 3/4 of your electricity bill for lighting. You leave the lights on for longer, but certainly not 4 times as long. So, and that's kind of like the thing that you're seeing across the globe when it comes to this. There's a couple of other things. It says in 2012, Jesse Absobel of Rockefeller University and his colleagues argued that thanks to modern technology, we use 65% less land to produce a given quantity of food compared to 50 years ago. By 2050, it's estimated that the area the size of India will be released from the plow and cow. And it says land sparing is the reason for forests are expanding, especially in rich countries. Blah, 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 blah. Everything seems to be getting a little bit better. This is also kind of reflected in a recent surveys done by the U.S. Geological Survey, which kind of had this running chart seemingly since 1908. And it shows that, as GDP increases, the consumption of different resources like aluminum, nickel, copper, steel, gold ran kind of parallel to that increase in GDP. So the higher the GDP, the more resources that we use. And when people like Paul Ehrlich or anyone that's suggesting those apocalyptic narratives, they suggest that trend would continue. That trend did continue until about I was born. So thank you. You're welcome. And we saw a divergence from those, a decoupling of economic growth and resource consumption. So I got this chart in front of me that kind of shows that from 1989, the GDP continues to go up, but our resource consumption trails off. So, I mean, it's a good sign for people that want to see conservation. It's a bad sign for people that have an anti-capitalist agenda. But I mean, Isaac, you're probably. It also this one article ends by suggesting that the irony here is that the green policies advocated by some will actually trend towards using more stuff than less stuff. So, Isaac, you could probably speak to that a little bit better than I can.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the same type of idea that, as countries get more sophisticated, they have fewer kids. That probably does a lot of this reduction in overall consumption of stuff anyway, because kids and people in general consume a lot of things. So I'd actually be really interested to see in the importance of that, because, you had the baby boomers after World War II, and obviously our consumption of stuff went up. So I think that this is all just a product of healthier people, wealthier people, just having fewer kids.
I don't think it's attributed to less kids because obviously population is going up. I would more look at innovation, like the idea that like the cell phone in my pocket is the equivalent of 10 years ago the computer that I had at home.
Sure, that's definitely part of it.
The camera that I had, video camera that I had, CD player that I had, like everything is just like in this little square that I put in my pocket, rectangle. So I would attribute it more to that. And it's like the idea, obviously the holidays just came around. I had the pleasure of having to be at a couple of different family parties, and one of which had like a number of kids, right? And, like those kids, they were more excited about getting like an iTunes gift card to get games on their iPad than they were of actually getting a physical toy. So again, I would attribute that more to innovation.
So video games are saving the planet.
Yes, that's the name of this episode.
That's my next blog post.
You should. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I would just mention, and Isaac's the one who grew up on a farm, and when you got to the point where what land area you said, Donnie, the size of India will be taken off of basically the agricultural grid.
Yeah, I mean, probably not necessarily. It's just the idea that that concept that we need less land to produce a given amount of food. Right,
and that's because of genetically modified organisms or GMO. Genetically modified food. Yes. It's the application of ingenuity and technology that makes it so that we can increase yields on less land, and that would be objectively a good thing if you're a true environmentalist. That you would need less land, cleared of forest in South America, for instance, to be used to grow food or to have livestock out there. And so, but the environmentalists are against that, and they're also against GMOs, which make it so that you can have less land to be used. So that's just there are so many contradictions of the environmental left, and it just really shows they're not actually very interested in the advancement of human civilization and the increasing survival and frankly comfort of human beings on this planet, because every time we figure out a way to be more efficient so that we can still do all the things that we want to do, they get mad about it. Mm-hmm. They're actually not happy unless we're suffering.
Go ahead, Isaac.
Yes, totally agree. I mean, there's a couple groups here in Minnesota that want us all to go back to organic farming, and they claim that it's better for the environment, but you can only come to that conclusion if you forget about the fact that you need to plow up like 3 times as many acres to grow the same amount of food. So, I mean, yeah, this is all due to the fact that we are becoming more productive people, and as you become more efficient, you just need less stuff.
Yeah, I want to save most of this discussion of what I'm about to bring up for a later podcast because I think it's deserving of its own segment, but I can't help but think about this documentary that I've been watching over the past couple of days, which is called One Child Nation, and it's about China's one-child policy. And the way that it kind of sets off like this documentary, it talks about how like back in the 80s, there was a concern that the overpopulation of China was going to lead to mass starvation. So that was used as a justification to initiate this, what turned out to be just an absolute horrible policy, anti-human policy. And again, I want to save that discussion for a later one, but it was this idea that like for every new human that's on the planet is going to put extra strain on all of the humans that are currently in existence. So what was their way of dealing with that? Have less humans. And this, all of this that what we're talking about, and I've got another piece that's from Cato, they do Human Progress, and it kind of just goes in detail about some of this idea that like is not necessarily like a zero-sum game, and the idea that like more population actually leads to better usage of resources. It just all the evidence runs counter to this narrative that led to the justification of that horrible Chinese one-child policy. And I think that it's worthy of its own discussion, but I couldn't help but make that connection while you guys were talking.
Yeah. One other thing, Jim, you were around during this time, the 80s.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So wasn't there this giant scare that disposable diapers were going to just fill up all the landfills, and that we were going to have this like crisis of used baby diapers?
I don't recall that specifically.
I'm pretty sure this is a real thing.
Isaac, Google that.
You have to Google that. although I will say,
it sounds legit.
It sounds legit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like Paul Ehrlich was out there saying we were all going to have too many diapers to get rid of.
Well, I know that there was kind of a resurgence in going to cloth diapers again.
Yeah.
During that time, and so there were services where you do the cloth diapers, and that lasted for about like 3 years, and people were like, "This is disgusting. We're not going to do that anymore."
I would have thought like 3 hours.
Yeah.
They're just like, nope, can't do it.
But one thing people kind of forget, and so there's so many antiquated images people have in their heads about things like, well, frankly, landfills. One of my jobs, the first beats I had as a reporter in rural Pennsylvania was I covered the county board that regulated or ruled over the county landfill. And so I'd go to their landfill meetings. I had a tour of the landfill. It didn't smell great, but they actually explained to me, it's like, this is not like big bulldozers pushing big piles of garbage all over the place, like on Staten Island or you see in movies and things like that. It's like the modern landfill is, there's a lot of technology, again, that goes into it to help the garbage decompose faster. Once a landfill has been used up, for the most part, they reuse it. They bring it back to nature. There's golf courses that are now constructed on old landfills. So this idea that we just have piles and piles of garbage just flying around when the breeze kicks up, just flying around everywhere. That again, that's an antiquated like Hollywood version of what modern waste disposal is like in the world, especially in the United States.
And I bring that up all the time. There's like a park that's probably a few miles away from where I live. And we go and walk around this park or whatever, and then there's just this weird like hill over on like the outskirts of the park. And I'm like, I wonder if that's a landfill. And I went home and I looked it up, and it was. And like from that point on, I was never concerned about how we handle trash again. Because if that like, nice green hill on a corner of a park is like an accumulation of waste, that's the worst that's going to come from it, I'm fine. Yeah.
And some landfills actually use the methane that's created, of course, from the breaking down of that garbage into fuel that is put into the energy system. So, these things are happening in the real world, and most environmentalists have no idea about it.
So the idea that, humanity has had its best decade yet, that kind of, it begs the question, like, will this trend continue? And I think you would think yes. Extreme poverty would continue to go down. Child mortality rates would continue to go down. Death from pollution will continue to go down. So that it just kind of made me think about, like, all the other stories that we talk about. Because I think that there's a little bit of a contradiction that goes on in just kind of like these general narratives that are going on. Especially ones that, even that we talk about. Because you've got right here, we're just talking about all of these things that worldwide that are trending in a good way. But then, when we're talking about other things, we talk about how it's trending in a bad way. So I'll bring 3 examples up. One is cost of healthcare. Obviously, under Obamacare, premiums like doubled. Like it's just horrible. Even the state of the health insurance before Obamacare wasn't great. It just seems to be getting worse. And the policies that we were suggesting or that are being suggested out there, whether it's, universal health care or whatever, that just seems to make it even worse potentially. So healthcare seems to get more expensive. Housing is another one. Housing prices have outpaced income for a while now. Housing prices have gotten a lot more expensive, virtually unobtainable for large percentages of the population. And college costs, which is obviously skyrocketed. So I was asking the question, I think that this will be kind of our first real discussion. Is life, and maybe we can just corner this in America, getting better or easier, I should say, or harder? Isaac, do you want to take that one?
It's easier.
No elaboration, or just a definitive statement, and then moving on.
This isn't a game show. You don't just get the one answer.
Whine about his student loans that he took. Oh, look at me! I went and got 2 master's degrees, and now I have student loans.
I understand the desire to take a shot at Justin whenever available. But, I mean, are you just going to dismiss my points there? Housing prices going up, college costs going up, healthcare costs going up. Makes it seem like it's a little bit tougher to make a living here in the United States.
Let me say something here.
Go ahead.
And this actually goes back to the previous point we were making and how the life for almost everybody on Earth is getting better. Mm-hmm. And that's actually, there are places where it's getting worse. Mm-hmm. And where it used to be better and now it's worse. And those are in socialist countries. If you combine
California.
And California. So if you combine capitalism and freedom, you get human prosperity. If you replace capitalism with socialism and you replace freedom with regulations and then all the way to tyranny, you get misery and death. It is unquestioned that the life expectancy and the birth rates and the health of people who live in Venezuela today is far worse than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, no doubt.
And that's because of socialism. And
Sure.
so we talk about Obamacare premiums, healthcare premiums going up. The healthcare system in this country is the most socialized aspect of the economy that we have in the free capitalist United States.
Right.
So it is not a surprise that we get worse service and higher prices, because that's what comes with socializing economies all around the world for all time. And so when you say that, what does that mean? Things are worse in America? Yeah, on that sector. And if we could just get the damn free market in there instead of the government, then we would see quality increase and prices come down. And then just the thing on the housing prices, ask anybody who's bought a home in the last 20 years whether they're mad that the housing prices are going up because their retirements are often tied into the property that they have and the home that they live in until they become, get into their 70s. And so it's not a sign of something bad that housing prices would go up or the cost of housing goes up. That's kind of the cost of everything kind of goes. Most things go up, but land is kind of a finite resource. And so buying property and having it appreciate in value over the years, as you know what, Isaac, you own property. You might actually have a better insight on this than even me.
I do own property, Jim. And as far as I'm concerned, I love skyrocketing rents. That's why things are getting better, Donnie.
Donnie doesn't like that.
No, absolutely not. So better for a specific
maybe
portion.
You should buy a rental property and join me in this adventure that is landlording.
Yes, yes, I should.
So I do think.
Let me just get my checkbook out.
What's that?
Let me just get my checkbook out.
Maybe if you spent less money on crappy Star Wars toys and movies, then you would actually have some disposable income, Donald.
Yeah, this is right here. This is the problem with conservatives. You guys turn off everybody that is actually concerned about like a problem that they see in society and just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like I'm not suggesting. I think you guys assume that I want the government to come in and into the picture. And I think I thought where Jim was going with that every sector that the government is more involved in the United States gets worse. That includes housing. Well,
yes, it does. So you'd have to dig deeper into where are housing prices going up. I mean, of course, property will appreciate in value, but it won't just skyrocket.
No.
Where property skyrockets is places like San Francisco, where they have banned the building of any new apartments or buildings or housings for people because the people that are there want their housing prices to skyrocket in appreciation, and they just don't want some grubby other new people coming in living in San Francisco. So there's basically, you can't build new housing in San Francisco anymore. So of course the price of what's there is going to go up because you've artificially created scarcity through government regulation.
The Bureau of Census reports that the average price of a new home in May of 1999 was $193,000. According to an inflation calculator, that price today should be $298,000. The same report places the average sale price in May of 2019 at $377,000, more than 26% higher than the price when accounting for inflation alone. So it's not necessarily just San Francisco or anything like that. I think this goes similar to the conversations that we've had about subsidizing college costs. There was a massive policy that came into place over the last several decades that led to the housing bubble, which popped in 2008. But then what did the government do? Instead of eliminating all of this idea, they just started to try to reinflate the bubble.
Right.
So you actually see there's a chart that I have somewhere over here. There's a chart that kind of shows that median income and housing prices stayed very similar. And then it wasn't until, 2000, a little bit earlier than 2000, that the housing prices started to really outpace median income. Then the recession happened, dropped back down to parity, and then lately it's been increasing even more. So it's definitely the case. Now, you mentioned that it's government interference, but you mentioned the idea that, like, oh, it's great for these people that have a house. That's such a short-sighted way to look at it.
Are we supposed to artificially deflate the cost of housing, Donnie, so that you can finally get off your ass and get your own house?
This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is what I'm exactly talking about the conservatives that you are self-defeating. You are assuming that I want the government to come in and artificially deflate the housing market. I am not saying that. I'm saying get the government out of the way.
Well, I agree with that.
Sure.
But but housing prices are still going to go up over the long term. And the longer you wait to buy your own home, the more expensive it's going to be.
The fact that I never insisted that the government should come in and artificially do anything, and you attack me like that, is perfect proof of what I'm saying.
No, I don't mean to attack you, Donnie, but like I don't know what you expect us to.
Imagining things, Donnie.
What? You just yelled at me.
I don't know what you expect us to do about this. I mean, the fact that housing prices increase over time is not a bad thing.
It is a bad thing.
Why?
Because a house is still worth a house. Doesn't matter if it's more expensive.
You know what, Donnie? You sound like Bernie right now.
So what should be done?
There's so many open houses and so many homeless people. Why don't we just take the houses and move them to the people who are living there?
But you are assuming that I want the government to do something about it.
So
I want them to get out of the picture. Get out of the picture. Stop subsidizing loans. Stop doing all the stuff that inflated the housing market in the first place, and allow the market to actually function.
Look, you won't find an argument with me on that, Donnie.
Okay, great.
As I thought, too big to fail was ridiculous, and that there's no such thing as too big to fail. If the banks overextended themselves on giving loans with the government encouragement and almost sometimes mandatory government dictates, then too bad. I'm sorry that you're going to fail and everyone else is going to fail. It was your mistake, but. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. But, of course, houses are going to appreciate in value over time.
Yes, but not 26% higher than general inflation.
See, yeah, but that's different, right? I mean, do you want my productive take on this?
Yes, please. That's all I've ever wanted.
Yeah, because, like, so far it's just been fun to, like, trigger you a little bit. Just telling Donnie what he doesn't want to hear. But, I mean, a lot of cities have zoning issues that prevent housing, like Jim was talking about in San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Paul has the same thing. We have something called the Metropolitan Council. They determine where they're going to hook up sewer lines and stuff like that. So they're artificially constraining the supply of new land for new homes to be built. So you have all these like new housing restrictions on, getting things up to code that add expenses. There's a thing in Minnesota where cities are charging more in fees than they need to in order to actually go through and inspect a property. Mm-hmm. So like you have all of these little layers of government that, absolutely driving up the cost. So I think that getting rid of things like single family housing zoning, which is incredibly unpopular. People get really mad when you start to tell them that people are going to be able to build apartment buildings in a residential neighborhood. They basically lose it. Mm-hmm. But those are the restrictions. I mean, it's not just at the federal level. It's also at the local and the state level that account for, rising prices.
But I think that there is this kind of tacit, like, we're fine with it just because, it's making prices artificially go up, which is making a generation artificially more wealthy, and I think that is a horrible way to look at it.
I never endorsed artificially inflating housing prices.
Yeah, let's put words in Jim's mouth now.
I never.
Let's record it back. Rewind it back a little bit.
I never said that. I said the idea that you buy a house and that its value appreciates over time is a good thing, and you said no, it's not.
Yeah, that's true, Donnie.
No,
Jim is right now.
He said, ask the people whose housing prices are going up, and they'll be fine with it. I don't think that that's a good justification for anything. So
you know what, Donnie? How much do you own? Do you own any stock?
Yeah, I own.
Do you own anything, Donnie?
No, I don't.
I mean, no.
I'm basically poor.
You have a dog.
I am definitely the poorest person on this podcast. I don't own a dog anymore.
I just want to apply your logic to
snap.
I want to apply your logic to the stock market. So, like, say, when the stock market at the crash, in 2008, the stock market took quite a dive, and it was a good time to get into the market. So if you had capital, you could get in the market, and now you see a lot of your stocks appreciating. Well, hell, let's go back even farther. If you bought Apple stock when they were about to introduce the iPad, there was a lot of talk about how this was going to be a disaster, and Apple stock was actually quite affordable back then. And now, of course, it is enormously valuable. But so you had your chance in around 2005, 2006 to get in on Apple in its next big explosion. But a lot of people missed it. And now stock for Apple is a lot more expensive than it would have been. So it'd have been nice to have owned stock in Apple 15 years ago. But if you didn't buy it then, you're out of luck because now it's very much more expensive. The same kind of thing deals with housing. Donnie, my mom's still living in the house that she bought.
Whippersnapper.
Well, my mom's still living in the house that my family bought in 1985, and she actually has a reverse mortgage, so she's able to retire. And the equity in that house that has grown, not from the bubble, but from having it for a long time, is what is affording her to live a comfortable retirement. Well, now, what's wrong with that?
So I should have bought a house when I was 11. All right, moving on.
I don't mean to be. I don't mean to be a jerk about it, Donnie.
Why didn't you buy it back in 06?
I don't mean to be a jerk about it, Donnie. But under what you said, it's like you don't like it that if housing prices increase. So my mother shouldn't enjoy the appreciation of the value of her property over the last 40 years because it shouldn't increase that much.
Are you advocating for price control, Donnie?
No, the absolute opposite. I want the market to function. I think that all of these things that the government, I think we could all agree on this, that are getting their hands in and are artificially increasing the costs of, whether it's intentional or non-intentional, I think is leading to this other chart that I have in front of me, which is showing that basically the percentage of U.S. household wealth by age of generations median cohort. So this graph, and I'll try to link this on the podcast or the show notes. It shows a comparison of the different generations, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials, in terms of how much of the household wealth is owned by that generation at any given year. So at the age of 35 for each of these generations, the baby boomers at age 35 owned 21% of household wealth in the country at the age of 35. Gen Xers at that same 35 was around 10%. And millennials, which are still a couple of years away from this, they're approaching 5%. So we're seeing a sapping of this. Each generation is seemingly doing worse in terms of accumulating wealth than the previous one.
Well, here's the good news. The baby boomers are all going to die. So then we're all going to move up. Gen X is going to move up. Millennials are going to move up. And then what do they call them? The Zoomers or Gen Z are going to move up as well. So, you just got to wait, I guess. You just got to wait longer.
Did you send us this, Donnie? Is this in the show notes and I'm missing it?
No, I found this earlier this morning when I was preparing.
Okay.
But I can send it to you.
Yeah, do that.
But I don't know. But even just thinking about it, I've been watching that show American Pickers, which is a lot of history stuff. It's a History Channel, actually. And they talk all the time about this idea of one parent doing one job and able to sustain a family of 7. That's not even close to reality today. Mm-mm. We're talking both parents working to try to sustain a family of 3, So I just think that this is kind of the trend I'm a little bit more concerned with, when we're looking specifically at our country. And I will lay the blame on crony capitalism and socialism and government action all day long. I don't think that we'll have a disagreement about that. And, you, Isaac, trying to compare me to Bernie Sanders. And one thing that I will say about socialists is they do point out a lot of things that are wrong in society. It's their policy prescription that is awful and obvious and going in the opposite direction of what I think it should be. But I think that these are things that we shouldn't just dismiss and assume that I am advocating government action by pointing these things out. It's a similar discussion that we had before when we were talking about YouTube and Google stifling conservative speech. It's if we point that out as a bad thing, and then people assume that we want government action. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out these things.
Yeah, absolutely, Donnie. But are we going to talk about student loans, or is that oxygen kind of taken up in this housing thing?
Well, no, I mean, if you want to, similar with, we've talked about that, obviously that's an unintended consequence of government action and subsidies, where I think that the housing is a little bit more of an intended consequence. I think that a lot of this policy stuff, especially during the height of the housing bubble, was intentionally to drive up housing costs. That's what they wanted to do. And specifically so that people could feel like they're richer because they have a house that's an inflated cost.
I don't think it was, I don't think it was intentional. I mean, you got to remember where a lot of this came from the Fannie and Freddie federally subsidized loans. Congress in the late 90s under Bill Clinton passed laws almost, to the point where banks would be punished if they didn't give out loans to people that they shouldn't have been giving out loans to, because they didn't really have the collateral necessary.
They wanted everyone to be a home buyer.
Everybody wants to be a home buyer. Well, not everybody can be a home buyer. In fact, not everybody can own Apple stock. I wasn't rich enough back in 2005 to buy some Apple stock. I wish I could have, but I wasn't, and so I missed out. That's just the way it goes. But so I don't think that it was intentional to boost the housing prices. I think it kind of turned that way, and people started gaming the system to do it that way.
Yes,
but I don't think that was necessarily the intent of the government. And to have me not impugn evil motives to the government really takes some work.
No, dude. There are quotes. I'll find them for next episode. There are quotes that basically said that if we can get everybody in a house, even if they can't afford it, the housing prices will go up, and they'll get wealthy just by owning that house, even if they can't afford it when they first got in. So whether or not it wasn't like in the bill that they passed or whatever, I think is beside the point. Those were the intentions.
Yeah. Well, just to revisit your little chart there with millennials owning 5% of global wealth at the age of 35. You
can see the trajectory.
Gen X.
Doesn't look great.
No, it doesn't look great. And baby boomers really took off. Well, the baby boomer generation was so huge that, and frankly, a lot of the American economy and even development, as far as buying housing and all of that stuff, was a lot different back then in the 60s and 70s. But it is a fact that as the generations have followed the baby boomers, Generation X got married later than their baby boomer parents did. They had fewer kids than their baby boomer parents did. They bought housing. They bought their first homes a lot later than the baby boom generation did. And the millennials are the same way, actually even more. That you guys are getting married even later than the Gen X generation did, and you're buying homes later than the Generation X did. And
now I will concede this. I will concede this to an extent, because I think that there is a cultural thing that is what you're suggesting here. And I attribute a lot of that to, again, just kind of like the way that the society is trying to push these kids to prioritize certain things over the other. However, I think there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing of just like maybe is Arrested Development causing this lagging in this chart here, or is it the lagging in this chart that's causing Arrested Development? I think there's a little bit on both sides there, but I will concede that to an extent.
Right, but getting married and starting a family is actually the one of the leading indicators of economic stability and health over time. And the longer you wait to put those, the longer you put those things off, the longer it will be for you to catch up to previous generations. So actually, I think you're right that there's chicken and egg in here, and there's also, of course, the student loan thing, and this is a government policy in which,
no doubt,
they offered pretty much free loans to kids who had obviously no collateral to put up, and then encouraged them to just keep taking out more government guaranteed loans. That right now the government basically handles all student loans at this point, where it used to be private banks. And so, they're tricking a whole generation into spending money, tens of thousands of dollars, and going hugely into debt, which puts you way behind in trying to get ahead.
Graduating with a mortgage and no house.
That's right, exactly. You graduate with a mortgage and no house, and that's a government created problem more than anything else.
Yeah, no doubt. I think we can all agree.
No doubt.
The solution is to get the government out of all of these things as much as possible, reintroduce free market mechanisms, price signals, incentives, all of that stuff. I think we would see a lot of this returning back to, there will obviously be macro trends, I'm not suggesting that like housing has to stay with inflation. I just think that some of these things are exacerbating the problem. But
so are we cool now? You're not gonna fight. We're gonna be cool.
No, and people send your comments. Email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. I seriously want to hear your opinion on this. Just write your email, wait like an hour, revisit it, and then send it.
Yeah.
Well, nobody forces you to go to college. Like, that's the thing. Like, you elect for that.
Yeah,
so
yes.
You can't really use that as an excuse for, like, or a complaint for not having things that you also want later. Like, you made a choice.
I understand that, but we're talking about things on a macro level. So yes, for you individually, you can go through your public schooling and the teacher's telling you every single day that you have to go to college, and at the end of the day, it's your choice. But realistically speaking, there's a lot of people that just do what they're told throughout their entire career of public schooling and try to go to college, even if they don't know what they're going for. So you're right.
Yeah, but it's really dumb.
I get it, but I'm not. I'm not trying to advocate for some type of court case that's going to potentially happen or anything like that. Like,
You're
I'm not trying
for reparations.
I am not trying to determine faults or anything. I'm just saying that this is what is happening in our country. That's all I'm saying.
That the easiest way to avoid a lot of these problems is just tell people to go to trade school instead of going to a 4-year college, especially for a degree that only qualifies you to work at Starbucks.
But we have a government system that completely monopolizes, for the most part, the public schooling system, and they are telling all of these kids day in, day out that the most important thing is for them to go to college.
Well, I got good news for you, Donnie, or at least good news for the generations coming up behind us, because when Elizabeth Warren is president, we all get free college. You all get free college, and I guess we're going to wipe out all the student debt as well at the same time, because that would only be fair. And so that's what we have to look forward to. There's going to be nothing to worry about anymore. We won't even be having these arguments anymore. We won't be mad at each other anymore, Donnie. Hashtag Jim's a jerk. I know that's going to trend. But actually, let's take 30 seconds or 90 seconds to talk about. So is that a solution? So if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is president, and they just say, okay, don't worry about it, free college. So
no, that'll only lead to even further arrested development. And college turns into high school 2.0, and everyone that graduates with a degree, these degrees will be worthless. So no, it's not a solution. It's not even close to a solution.
Now we're back to being the podcast I know and love. Thank you, Donnie.
Come on, man. Let's talk about electric cars. Can we move on?
We should have invited Noder to be on this episode so we could call you a socialist.
Yeah, because that's productive. Let's move on. Let's talk about electric cars. This is a discussion that started probably a week and a half ago in Jim's doorway. We were talking about this. So I wanted to kind of actually recreate. I actually said, all right, let's stop having this conversation. We'll have it on the podcast one of these days. So let's get on this a little bit, just so we can kind of stick to our format a little bit. I do have some stuff here from the think tank world. There was a study recently that was talking about zero emissions cars, quote unquote, zero emissions cars, and how they're actually dirtier than their diesel fuel counterparts. So this was a study that was done by the IFO Institute in Munich in Germany. It says when CO2 emissions linked to the production of batteries and the German energy mix, in which coal still plays an important role, are taken into consideration, electric vehicles emit 11% to 28% more CO2 emissions than their diesel counterparts, according to this study. Now, I will say that after looking this up, there is debate over these findings. Critics insist that their assumptions are too pessimistic, and they suggest that suggesting that diesel is cleaner than electric vehicles is fake news, according to them. But what they don't contend, the critics don't contend, is that electric vehicles are truly zero emission. I think that kind of goes without saying. The article that I have in front of me covers a couple of different other studies. Couple other different studies. 2017 study by researchers at the University of Michigan found that the amount of CO2 emitted by electric cars varied wildly by country, but it certainly wasn't zero. The report notes that electric car recharged by coal-fired power plants produce as much CO2 as gasoline-powered cars that get 26 miles per gallon. A plug-in recharged by natural gas powered plant is like driving a car that gets 58 miles per gallon. Mm-hmm. It says the University of Michigan researchers calculate that given the energy mix in the U.S., the average plug-in produces as much CO2 as a conventional car that gets 55.4 miles per gallon. And then even the benefits here are exaggerated because they don't take into account the CO2 required to actually get the components for these engines and stuff. A separate study from the Union of Concerned Scientists found that depending on the type of plug-in being built, manufacturing a battery-powered car generates anywhere from 15% to 68% more CO2 emissions than a conventional gas-powered car. The reason is that producing the batteries is incredibly energy intensive. So despite whatever the nitpicking of that German study is, the point is made that zero emission cars, quote unquote, are far from zero emissions. So I forget exactly how our conversation started, but it was basically like, I think you commented the idea that electric power cars will never be like the mainstay of our automotive fleet. Something like that, right?
Not in our lifetime, and probably not in the lifetime of any children we may have.
All right, make your case.
Well, I mean, because it's just not efficient enough, and it won't be. Unless there is a groundbreaking breakthrough in the ability of batteries to store electricity, it is just not practicable to convert on a huge scale an economy like the United States or anybody in the EU into majority or 90% or 100% electric cars, which is what some of the radicals insist must be done in the next 20, 30 years to save the planet. It's just not going to happen. One, it's not necessary because the internal combustion engines we have now that burn on gasoline or diesel are so clean compared to what they were in the 1970s. Again, people have this myth that that there's carbon pollution. It's not. It's carbon dioxide that's coming out, and that's produced when you burn fossil fuels, and that's not a pollutant. And we've cleaned the pollutants out of our tailpipes and out of our factories in such a scale over the last 20, 30 years that we should be applauding these things. So putting that aside as that is not necessary to save the planet, it'll just never be cost effective enough. The amount on everything on a macro scale and on a micro scale. Take a hybrid into the mechanic to get repaired. It's going to be, that alone is a lot more expensive depending on what's gone wrong with your car than just a regular, gasoline powered engine in a Honda Accord, for instance, as opposed to a Toyota Prius. Those batteries don't last forever. You have to replace them. That's very expensive. If you have a Tesla, that car alone, even their cheapest one, is more expensive than a luxury car that's made from gasoline. There is just nothing that you can see on the horizon and if it happens, that'd be great. But there's nothing that you can see on the horizon technologically that will make battery-operated cars be able to hold a charge long enough to be practicable for most Americans. I mean, they're very popular in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York and places that are densely populated where you only have to drive maybe 20, 30 miles in a day. If you live out in the even in the far suburbs of someplace like Illinois where you have to drive all the way into Chicago because that's where you choose to live, way out by the Wisconsin border, it's not practical for you to have an electric car as your commuter every day. And if you live in Montana or in Iowa or anything like that, you will never have an electric car. It doesn't make any sense unless that battery can charge and hold a charge for 2 or 3 days. And then secondly, we ship almost everything in this country via trucks. Trucks will you'll never get a battery power. You'll never get enough battery power to haul like a 2 or 3 trailer truck that you see on the highways all the time. Those are powered by diesel because diesel's a more powerful engine, and that's what's necessary to haul all this stuff from this part of the country to that part of the country. Electricity will never be practical enough to do the shipping and the trucking that we have in this country. That is the lifeblood of our economy. So that's why we will be long dead before we might even have flying cars before we have electric cars on a grand scale in this country.
Isaac, are you as pessimistic on this idea of electric cars in the future?
I'm not optimistic about them by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know if I'm as certain as Jim is that they will never be an alternative. I think that there are obviously huge barriers to it. And like one of the things that Jim didn't get a chance to mention was they lose 40% of their charge when it's 20 degrees above zero.
Right.
So that's a huge swath of the United States that basically renders electric cars implausible in the wintertime. So, I mean, right now, electric cars are just playthings for white, wealthy liberals. There's a study from Morgan State University that found most of the people who own an electric car are more affluent, more educated. They're predominantly white males. They're boomers. They're older. And they tend to vote for Democrats. They have higher levels of electric car ownership than people who are not interested in politics. So like right now, that's essentially what this is. This is one more chance. This is like the new Toyota Prius. You know, the South Park episode where the smug comes into South Park.
Yes.
Like that's what the electric car is at this point in time. Most people who own an electric car have an internal combustion car also.
So I had go ahead. Sorry, finish your point.
No, go ahead.
All right. So I again, family parties. I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law, and we were talking about like the Tesla truck or something, and he was either referencing that or some other electric car. And he says like, because I mentioned how it takes forever to charge up, and he's like, the one Tesla whatever. He's like, it takes like 20 minutes to charge up to get like 80% of your battery or something. And I said 20 minutes is a long time. Yep. And he's like, no, I mean, it probably takes me like 15 minutes to fill up my gas tank. And I'm like, you are really exaggerating the amount of time that is. Right?
That's buying a lot of beef jerky inside.
Right. So then he was like saying how he's got a big truck and it's a big gas tank or something, whatever. And I'm like, next time go and time it. Because I'm telling you, it's going to be less than 5 minutes. I guarantee you. So I timed mine, and I forgot exactly what it was, but it was like 1.5 minutes to fill up my gas tank, much smaller than his. So even if I was like to triple it, the gas tank, that like it still would have been less than 5 minutes. So I think just that on a consumer level is going to stifle a lot of people from ever actually doing this. But I think one of the big things that you're missing out on here in your prognostication is the idea of driverless cars. And like Uber, when they're going to like roll out their next generation driverless cars thing, where you don't actually have a driver, just a car pulls up, picks you up, blah, blah, blah. Google, same thing. They're moving forward with this type of stuff. And if they, at the onset, like create their fleet with electric cars, then I think that destroys this idea of like whether or not it's financially viable for your average person, because the idea that like government mandate isn't going to stop me from like driving a gas powered car, but Uber might, type of thing. Right.
Well, I get that. Well, that would be the market deciding whether electric cars are a good idea or not.
But it's like a revolutionary type thing.
And again, I put the caveat in the beginning: unless there is a major breakthrough in battery technology that we don't foresee just yet, and that we haven't been able to foresee, despite the fact that there's a lot of incentives to try to get those batteries a lot better, and we haven't quite reached that yet. Putting that aside, I just don't see it happening because with current technology or even something, I mean, we're talking like a giant leap in technology. Now, let's say there's an Uber car that comes along, and they're probably going to need to have a little guy, another little car, automated car, come around and like plug itself in, kind of like a refuel of the jet over the thing.
No. Every night they will just bring back to their warehouse and they'll plug in while other ones go.
That's right, like a Roomba. That's how we talked about it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, the Roomba. One Roomba comes back, plugs in, the other one goes out. Yeah, but we have to see. But that actually would be practical only in that application, though. I actually was talking about this with my wife the other day, and my family lives in Pittsburgh. Her family lives in Philadelphia, and we will often drive out there. We'll stop. It's a 7-8 hour drive to Pittsburgh from here in Chicago, and then it's another 5-6 hours to Philadelphia from Pittsburgh. And so if we're going to go out there for the holidays, we'll stop in Pittsburgh for a couple days, we'll go to Philly for a couple days, and then we'll come on back. And so let's just say it was mandated that I had to have an electric car. That was the only thing on the market because they've outlawed the internal combustion engine, which is something Bernie Sanders and AOC would like to do. So okay, maybe it would be pretty hard to get all the way to let's just say, so we're driving along, right? And so we're driving across Indiana. And so we're thinking, well, we got about 20% charge left. Let's try to make it, to Toledo, Ohio instead. And then suddenly we hit a traffic jam. And now we're stuck on the freeway and we can't get off. And the next charging station is 20 miles away. And I see my battery going down. And eventually I just run out because there was something unforeseen on my path to slow me down, and now I'm in big trouble. But with gasoline, that is never really a problem because you wouldn't let yourself. You can just get through it. People don't run out of gas on the side of the road very much anymore. That's just the way it works out now.
Sure.
Okay, so that's a scenario you can't plan for. And so when all these people say, no, you can do it. Look, electric car will take you X number of miles. It's like, well, what if something happens? What if it's cold? or it gets colder throughout the day or something like that. That makes a big difference. What if you're driving up and down mountains? That takes a lot more power out of it than otherwise would be driving across the plains of Indiana and Ohio. And then thirdly, okay, let's just say that I could, and then so I've had this car now for 7 years, and so the battery, its efficiency is reduced, just like it is on your iPhone, right? If you've had it for a few years, you have to plug it in more often because it doesn't hold the charge as long. Now it's going to be extremely expensive for me to swap out my battery and get a new battery, to buy a new battery. So I'm not going to do that. I'm on a budget, and so we're going to go. And so we drive, and we get. I am 40 miles away from my parents' house, but I need a charge. So now I got to pull over. And now I got to wait for somebody to unplug their own car being charged. And it's going to take 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, I'm the sixth guy behind to get my thing plugged in. And now I got to wait 3 hours to get my car charged so I can go an extra 25 miles to get home. Those are the kind of problems that the advocates for electric cars never, ever talk about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you're painting a pretty bleak picture to defeat a straw man that I didn't even propose.
No.
Because I do think that if we are going to see some type of overhaul when it comes to electric cars or whatever, it'll be this kind of market-driven thing, whether it's a Google fleet or a Uber fleet or something like that.
Happy to see
it'll
it.
happen in urban centers first before it ever kind of makes it out to the suburbs and then rural areas eventually. But yeah, it'll get to a point where like less and less people actually own a car. They'll only rely on Uber, whether it's a $10 drive here or there every day. And then I think it'll get to a point eventually where it's going to be harder and harder to have a license to drive your own car. I think that's probably a topic for a different day because we're already running long on time here.
Then you'll have to go to the Skynet DMV.
That's right.
Because I'm Donnie and I believe in a post-apocalyptic world.
What?
No, so
I'm very optimistic about our future, sir.
No, you're not. You were just complaining about your student loans and the fact that you don't even own your car.
I do own my car.
So one of the things that I think is going to be a really big impediment to the adoption of electric cars, even on a fleet-wide scale, is the cost of those fast chargers. So the cost of replacing a gas pump is like $400 to $600. These DC fast charging things cost anywhere between $4,000 and $51,000. So if you want to have like a fleet-wide thing, the average, range for an electric car is like 350. That's a good one. Actually, that's not average, but that's like the best possible range right now. So let's just say it improves, right? Like you get basically a tank of gas gives you about 300 miles generally, right? Like that's been my experience. So you'd either need to have this super long fast charger or this like very expensive fast charging station and a huge network of them in order to accommodate like a fleet of vehicles. I mean, part of me is skeptical about the idea that we're going to need fewer cars in the future because we're all going to use Uber and Lyft. Like that would require a huge shift in the way that people get to work because you're going to have to plan for peaks, not averages in terms of ridership. Yeah,
it's no doubt about that. But like the benefit that I see in what I'm thinking the future will carry out is that this isn't just some dictate, this mandate from the government that we just have to figure out. This is, these multi-billion-dollar, tens of billion-dollar corporations that have to make these things, and if they underestimate, then they take the loss or whatever. But that's for Google and Uber to figure out. I get what your point is, and I get what your point is, Jim. But I just think that if we were to see a mass unveiling of electric vehicles, it would be in this way. That would be driven by innovation in the market or whatever, but it would be like an Uber self-driving car type of thing.
Absolutely, and I think that would be a fantastic thing to see. I'd be very excited about it, actually. But my point with that whole rant I went off on trying to go home for the holidays is just I just wanted to bring up some of the things that the advocates for electric vehicles never bring up.
Yeah.
These
and that's a very valued thing to bring up, no doubt.
It may be, maybe a straw man, but these are actual real world things that happen when people are traveling for the holidays all the time.
Yes. And in terms of like, government mandate, like you guys all have to have a electric vehicle by, 2024 or something like that. Like, yes, all of those are very valid questions to bring up. Like, you didn't account for all of these things, sir. You can't abide by your rules if you can't accurately project what's going to happen in the future. Gentlemen, we are long. So any last words of wisdom? Anything you want to get off your chest before we sign off for the week?
Let's just let the audience know where they can send flowers for Justin.
Don't even start. He's fine.
Justin's fine.
He's
fine.
He'll be back next week, hopefully. All right, is that it?
Yeah, I hope we can still be friends, Donnie. I didn't. Nothing personal. No.
Okay. Thank you all for tuning in. Tune in every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. You could also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube even. I'm pretty sure all of those have rating systems as well, so give us a thumbs up at the very least. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. You could also send us your comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at TheFrackingGuy.
And Jim, same question. Where can the fine people find you?
On Twitter at JLakely, and follow the Heartland Institute at HeartlandInst.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.